at the Queensland University of Technology. So she's going to be talking to you about your brain, but also your belly. I can only assume. She's also the CEO and co-founder of McFit, so she works in brain games and apps, as well as having written books. And what does this say, Berna? She's a supporter of Broncos.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Broncos is.
I can only assume that's...
Maybe it's a netball team.
Or a soccer team, maybe. Actually, no, I think I remember. I think they're a band. I think they're playing tonight.
Right, later tonight, yeah.
Any other Broncos fans in? Thank you for being here and watching the game, because Selena made it up. Selena also has what she describes as a side hustle as a comedian, and thinks that Australians are indeed some of the luckiest people alive. So please welcome one of those very lucky people, very warmly. It's Selena Bartlett.
Hello everyone. Thank God it's Friday night. I'm a professor, Selena Bartlett. I am an addiction neuroscientist. And I decided that tonight was the night that I was going to come out and confess to each of you that I am actually a sugarholic. That's right, I'm addicted to sugar. And after a hard day at work, I'll be driving home and my inside voice says, resist the urge. Think about something else, you can do it. You're strong, you're resilient, you can resist those Tim Tams tonight. And you would think after 25 years of studying the brain that I would know how to resist my urges and my cravings. But as they say, if you can't do, you teach. So I was actually never going to be a scientist, ever. In fact, I didn't even know how to spell the word neuroscientist. I was a country girl from Nanango. That's right. That's right. My screen time back then was countdown. Ready? Dancing Queen. And then I was always confused about, should I go for how's that? Or I am made for loving you, baby. That's how old I am. And my TV shows were like Disney Princess, Cinderella, and Nanu Nanu. So you can kind of see how my screen time really had dire consequences for me. And so I had to actually get a job. And so I actually decided to do a pharmacy degree. And that's because Mum said it's a great job for a girl. And and my dad's a pharmacist. And then I was out there, on the other side of the river, and I was writing a thesis on why people buy cough and cold medications in a pharmacy. And I grab your seat, it's really compelling stuff. I know you want to know the answers. And then I got that phone call that actually changes your life forever. You know those phone calls? And it was my mother and my sister, Francesca, ended up at Wollston Park. And I know, now I go to the serious part. She actually ended up in a straitjacket and an overdose of haloperidol. And at that moment, why people buy cough and cold medications in a pharmacy seemed very relevant to me. And it was very clear to me in that moment, we did not know how the brain worked. And so this naive country girl decides she's going to go and work out how the brain works. And so I go back and do my PhD, and I learn how to use a pipette. And let me tell you, 1 microliter is a really small amount. And also how to dissect a brain, because this is someone that passes out the side of blood. Anyway, next minute I know I'm at the John Curtin School of Medical Research at ANU, and I'm doing a postdoc. And I'm sitting at my desk, and at that point I was pregnant with my now 18-year-old daughter. And I was reading these amazing papers of people in California where they were actually able to study the inside of neurons and how the proteins move around. And you could actually track them with dyes. And I'm like, oh my God, I've got to learn how to do that. I can't do that right now. This is the 90s. And basically we moved to California with a 4-year-old and a 3-month-old baby. And we arrived 3 weeks prior to September 11. My father calls and he says, Selena, turn on the phone, turn on the television. And I did, and what I saw was the second aeroplane hit the second tower. And I'm like, oh my goodness, did we make a good decision? Anyway, after lots of ups and downs and fits and starts, I find myself sitting across the desk from the second in charge of my research center at UCSF in San Francisco. Anyway, and he looks at me across the table and he says, "We want you to become the director of medications development. We'll give you $1 million, 1 year, come up with a treatment for alcohol addiction." And just serendipitously that same week, when I actually decided to take the job, when everyone thought I was completely out of my mind, I happened to be giving a talk at a Gordon conference in Boston. And the person that discovered varenicline, which is Chantix in the US and Champix here for nicotine cessation, was giving a talk in the same session as me. Now that drug works by binding to the nicotinic receptors inside your brain. So if you have a cigarette and you feel really good, or that first glass of alcohol, it's releasing dopamine and it's working through nicotinic receptors. This drug works to actually take down dopamine and help you resist craving. Anyway, looking at his results, thinking, I need to get that drug into my lab. And so after a glass of wine, after the session, I said to him, I need to get that drug. And he said, there's no way. It's not FDA approved yet. And we don't want to mess up our great results with your dirty alcohol studies. And true story. Anyway, so as my friend, who I think is here tonight, said to me, you can take the girl out of the country, but you can never take the country out of the girl. Anyway, so I called them every 2 weeks for 2 years. And our lab at UCSF was the first to get the drug. And so we were able to show it reduces alcohol consumption. So that means you can publish it in a good journal. So immediately it's picked up by Reuters. And I don't know what that says about journalists, but we do know that getting one drug to solve alcohol and nicotine addiction is great clickbait. So we get to present these results at an alcohol conference in Chicago. And before I know it, I'm basically on Good Morning America. Anyway, you know what, the lights come on, very much like this, but I'd never been on television, and basically they go 3, 2, 1, over to you. And it was like deer in the headlights, mouth dry, like kind of right this second. Silence, which is quite something because everyone that knows me knows I love to talk. Anyway, we were able to basically take that money, that million, and turn it into $8 million. We ended up completing a bunch of different clinical trials. And then I moved back to Brizzy, my roots. This is where I grew up. And I have a lab over at the Translational Research Institute, which is just beautiful. Anyway, I was standing at my desk because, as you know, sitting is the new smoking, right? And my collaborator calls from Stanford Research International. And we'd set up these experiments because we were trying to understand how does alcohol actually change these nicotinic receptors inside the brain. And what do you think the control in our study is? Anyone have a guess? Sugar. Because that doesn't do anything, right? Anyway, so she calls me and she said, you won't believe this, but the animals that are drinking sugar, the nicotinic receptors and the addiction centers of their brain are changing in exactly the same way as the alcohol experiments and my nicotine experiments. And we both did not believe these results. So my poor PhD students, which I think maybe some of them are here tonight, went on to replicate all of these findings, and then we published it. And just so you know, when the Nobel Prize Committee calls each of you tonight and says, what did she discover? Just tell them that sugar is as addictive as alcohol and nicotine. Sugar is really toxic to your brain, and it gets stored in your body in those little fat cells that line your stomach and your thighs. And I know. And so I thought also, just like you, I was conquering the world with these discoveries. And at that time I was running a lab, I was raising 2 children, and I was keeping my now ex-husband really unhappy, happy. So, just let him know that. And there's 2 other things I got wrong as well. I shouldn't laugh at this point. One of those things was I was studying how alcohol and sugar was changing the brain, but actually people are drinking and overeating for good reason. And that is because each of us are born stressed out. After millions of years of evolution, ice ages and asteroids, is it any surprise And the other thing you should know is that the way neurons signal inside the brain is actually very similar to mushrooms. That's right, your brain's a mushroom. No, not quite, but our DNA has 30% similarity to mushrooms, more than plants. Isn't that amazing? So it makes you start to think, there's all these new experiments happening with psychedelics, right? And it makes you start to think, are we doing that so we can become fun guys again? I had to do that. And so even on all my runs, it's the only thing that cracked me up, and there's two things that happen with these experiences. Either people come out of those experiences where they feel like they're going to be a Zen Buddhist, or they're going to be Donald Trump. That's kind of what happens after these trips. Anyway, sorry, and I don't want you to leave here depressed and anxious tonight. That's not my aim, because that's not my job to do that. Sorry, I just lost my spot. Because the younger generation is going to save us. Thank God for the younger generation. A young woman set up her lab next to mine, and she was able to show me that an adult brain can change no matter what age. She called it neuroplasticity. That's right, your brain can change at any age. And so immediately you think, fantastic, I'm not stuck with my brain, right? Isn't that what you think when you hear that? So what I did immediately was I got to understand how this is working in terms of the mechanisms underneath. And secondly, I've got to become a guinea pig in that experiment, because as you know, I have tons of issues, right? And I could spend all night lying here and telling you about all of them and go back all through my family history, all the way back to mushrooms, for example. And we don't want to do that. And also, I was actually born a brunette. You can talk to my parents about that. But, so what did I do with this neuroplasticity thing is I started with just 3 of the S parts, like in the category of S of my issues. Sitting, sugar, and stress. And I just focused on those 3 things first. Why sugar? Well, sugar has 3 properties that you have to know about. 1, it activates the prefrontal cortex, which is the top part of your brain where impulse control sits. That is the part of your brain that stops you taking the 3rd donut. The second major property it has, it doesn't release ghrelin or leptin. So what does that mean? It doesn't tell you that you're full after eating. So it activates your hypothalamus and it activates your body. So I remember sitting at lunch with an Italian neuroscientist and he looked at me and he said, and I was eating this chicken and cheese panini, and he looked at me and said, wow, God, you can eat a lot. And at that time, I really could. And so the first thing I noticed when I started to actually pay attention to how much added sugar I was having and started to reduce it, I actually started to feel full from eating again. So that was just fantastic. And also I got my waistline back. That was completely unexpected. And then I focused on stress. So we're beating here millions of years of evolution. So that's why it's so hard, right? So let's just start thinking about the brain like a muscle and start training it like a muscle and applying these principles of neuroplasticity. And that's what I started to do. Just do 3 reps of 30 deep breathing exercises. Don't think about it, don't feel about it, just do it. And see what happens. It's really miraculous that it's so simple that we can be in charge of our own brain chemistry. And that's what I try and tell my 18-year-old daughter as she grunts at me. And then lastly, the 3rd thing, sitting. I could sit for 7 hours in a row and not move and write my papers and my grants. So I start to stand, I start to move my body, and then I discovered with time that you actually need to move your body tons more than you even expect that you should be moving it. That was also really surprising. I am a bit slow. Anyway, so you put those 3 S's together and you do it daily, not every 2nd day, not every 3rd day, and then those little things start to add up and turn into something beautiful. Anyway, I think And this is why I love being a neuroscientist in the 21st century. I think, and we've got a lot of work to do, we're in the early stages, but I think neuroscience, big data, AI and technology are going to marry together and disrupt mental health and turn it into brain health. And so that's why we started a health tech company to help entrepreneurs and other people develop games and apps so that we can be in this revolutionary space. And I hope each of you can benefit from it too. All of the things I talked about tonight were built by a team of people. Some of them are here with me tonight who work at the TRI, and others that are scattered around the world. And I just want to say thank you to them who are using their life and their work to help to understand the brain so we can improve the lives of people. So thank you.